Well, welcome to the channel. I'm Randy Broussard, your host, and I have a very special guest with me today, Mr. Anthony Rante.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks
good.
for
I
having me, Randy. Appreciate it.
appreciate you coming over. Mr. Rante is 43 years of productive engineering. He is the author of the JFK Assassination, the book JFK Assassination, a technical review of the evidence. He's a very multi-talented person, engineer, and also a researcher. And the book we want to talk about certainly is very interesting. He uses his 40 years of engineering experience to dissect and analyze the significant parts of the crime. He presents the material in a step-by-step methodical approach, adds likely scenarios, and in an effort to shed light on this mystery. And what a mystery it is. And thank you so much, Anthony.
Sure.
I want to start out by asking you, how did you get interested in the assassination? What prompted you to write the book? And I know it
Well,
was a long time, took a while.
sure. Yeah, it sure did. When I was a little kid, we lived in Cicero, Illinois, which is just outside Chicago. And I remember, I don't know, I was like 5 years old, 6 years old. And I remember when Jack Ruby shot Oswald. Oswald was the prime suspect at that time. And my father was watching it on live TV, and he was in the other room. And that really, I mean, he was going nuts when that happened. I mean, everybody was, because there was nonstop TV coverage over the weekend.
I
And then
remember.
this happens at the end of it. So that's when I first was interested in it, but I never really started doing the research until after I got out of college. And I didn't study a lot of history in college because I was in engineering, and I wanted to get more knowledgeable about his history. So I went back and I said, here's an event I'd like to know more about. And that's pretty much when I started. And that was like in my 20s. So that was like 40 years ago. And every book that I read, I mean, it just opened up more and more questions. And it was like a puzzle that was just growing and growing and growing. And then, with all the stuff on TV, it just felt like it just kept getting, it diverged more and more. And we never came up with any kind of solution. So that really made me really curious. And that's kind of when I started to put together some of the research. And then, when I started to see some of the things they were doing on TV, and they would kind of talk about it, like I can get into it in more detail, but like the Zapruder film, when
No,
they're
go ahead.
saying, here's the frame where it actually shows the bullet going through Conley, and at the same time, you've got Jackie and JFK responding to a shot that hit them. Well, that's just impossible. When you go through the math, you realize, the muzzle velocity of the rifle, that bullet that hits Conley just came out of the rifle. It's impossible for Jackie to respond to JFK being hit. I mean, first JFK's hitting, and then she turns to him to see. This all happens behind the sign on the Zapruder film. But the point is that when JFK is hit, that had to occur several frames before Conley was hit. And, that was one fact that jumped out at me. People are saying, well, this shows that there's a single bullet here. And I'm thinking it shows the opposite. When you go through the math, it clearly shows there's two separate shots. Then you go in and you start doing more research. You read the testimony of John Conley, who was in front of JFK. I mean, he was very clear about what happened. He said, I heard a shot. I turned to my right to check on JFK, because he was sitting right in front of JFK, and he couldn't see him over his right shoulder. So he started to turn back to his left. And when he was about center, he felt a blow to his back. He didn't hear that shot. So that was his testimony. So he's defining those two bullets. But the one that I really like is Nellie Conley, because she heard the first shot, said that was definitely a shot. They were very familiar with rifle shots and the noise that they make. So she turned right away to look at JFK, and he was grabbing his throat. And then she says, then my husband was hit. And she was very consistent over the years with that story. So that tells me there's two separate shots there. And once you start to realize that there's more shots than what we were told from the Warren Commission study, you start to realize there had to be multiple shooters, or there's more to the story than we were told.
Sure. And I know you mentioned, I think you mentioned in your book about a certain frame of the Zapruder film,
Right.
the
Yeah,
224, where the
exactly.
lap
Yeah.
colonies. Can you speak to that or?
Sure, absolutely. See, Zapruder film was taken of the motorcade. He took that from an ideal position. He was standing on a pedestal. His secretary was behind him, holding him steady, and he filmed the whole path on Elm
Oh,
Street. And
yeah.
that's where everything happened. The only problem is there was a sign that obstructed the view for a portion of the video, but we can see what happened before the limo goes behind the sign, and we can see what happens right when it comes out from the sign. And right before it goes behind the sign, you can see JFK. He's sitting on the right side of the car, or the passenger side of the car. He's waving to the crowd on the right. Jackie is waving to the crowd on the left. She's sitting to his left. And the same with the Connollys. Now the car goes behind the sign, and Zapruder followed it perfectly. He just tracked it perfectly. So when the car comes out from the sign, he's got a good view of all of the occupants. And the first person we see is John Connolly. Now, if you go back to his testimony, he's turning back over to the right by this time.
Right.
And that's when we look at frames 223 and 224. And in those two frames, you can definitely see the lapel of Connolly flip up, and then you can also see his cheek puff up, and that is from the bullet. That's his reaction from the bullet going through his chest and causing pressure on his lung. And most researchers have accepted this. Most everybody agrees with that. But what I looked at is what was happening with JFK and Jackie, and you can clearly see in 223 and 224, Jackie is now turning to her right because her husband was hit. Now, he had to be hit several frames before that. And like I
Separately.
said a few minutes ago, you start to look at like the muzzle velocity is 2,000 feet per second. And, that bullet that hit Connolly just came out of the rifle in that same frame. So in this respect, we can kind of use the Zapruder film based on the frame speed as a clock for the whole process.
Yeah.
And that's what I thought when I looked at that. That was what I was able to conclude.
Yeah. Well, I bet you can only imagine what Zapruder, he didn't know what he was getting into. That
Right. Oh yeah.
his
Yeah.
life changed forever.
He was all excited about his new camera. He says, "I'm going to go out
right.
and use it."
And
But he was scared to get on that pedestal. I was
yeah,
reading some about that. That
I
his
heard about
secretary
that.
got behind him and
Yeah.
held him.
Well, speaking of Zapruder film, I wanted to ask you, I know you researched it a lot. It's a key item of evidence to support
Right.
conclusion, and it's a time clock and all this. Um, last few years, I've been running across information that was kind of astounding to me that there are researchers out there, and I know you have your thoughts on that, that doubting the authenticity of it. It may be tampered with, or what is your
Yeah,
thought on that?
I don't have an opinion on that. I did not see. I went through it. The nice thing about it is today we have it online. It's cut into frame by frame. You could look at each frame, and I couldn't see any jumps in the frames or anything
Right,
that indicated to me that it was modified. I know there's been some stories about that,
right,
but I just couldn't see it. And based on what I've just been talking about with the early part of the shooting, I think it looked like it was intact the whole time. I didn't see any evidence of that.
right.
Yeah.
Doesn't it also show maybe a shooter? I have to watch it again because when I read your information, I said, "Man, I didn't know this about a shooter on the roof of the Rutgers County building."
No, I did not see anything in that. That I don't think
Okay.
I have that in there. That might have been some other researcher. But yeah,
Oh,
I looked through these films over the years in a
I
lot
didn't
of
see that either.
detail. Yeah, no, I did not
I
see
didn't.
that. No.
Okay. Um, well, I know you certainly had issues, as a lot of us do, with the Warren Commission's conclusions.
Right.
And I think you had mentioned something about it's a matter of just simple math. Can you
Right.
explain that?
Well,
So simpler for me, the better, because I'm no math person.
sure. No, yeah. Yeah, I think it gets down to it really does get down to the simple math, because the rifle, the alleged weapon, was a bolt action rifle. And they did Warren Commission, and this is one of the early things I remember in some of the videos. They did a lot of testing on cycling that rifle, and they had expert after expert shoot it, and they came up with 2.5 to 3 seconds between shots, and which
Without
would
even
mean,
aiming, right?
yeah, and that doesn't take into any account you're going at, and plus you're going. The other thing is, from that position, that alleged position, you're actually trying to track a moving target. So take all that into account. The absolute minimum time would be 6 seconds for 3 shots. So you can't get a fourth shot off in that 6 seconds. There's just no way. So the Warren Commission had to, for their objective, to show that Oswald was the lone assassin, and he didn't have anybody else helping him with the shooting. They had to show, they really showed that was the maximum amount of shots you could get. So now you go to the autopsy information that we have, and we never got a real good idea of the autopsy. I felt that the book by James Jenkins, At the Cold Shoulder of History, really explains a lot. He felt, when he was right there, and he explains it in a lot of detail in his interviews and in his book. And he said that it looked like, when he was done at the end of the day with this autopsy, he felt that Kennedy was hit with 3 shots. And the one would be in the head at right about the hairline. The other one was in the throat. And they didn't realize initially that was a shot. They thought it was just for a trach. But when they talked to the Parkland Hospital doctors, they said, "Oh yeah, that was a shot." And then there was another one in the back, and this one in the back, that's a critical shot, because that was initially they kind of moved that wound over to be in line with the neck, but it really wasn't. It actually stopped short, and James Jenkins explained it real well. He says that was not a fatal wound; it never penetrated into the lung or anything. So now you take those 3 shots. Now you got to add all the wounds to Connolly, which was at a minimum 1 shot. And then there was a bystander who was at the triple underpass who got hit from a deflected shot, which it totally missed the whole limousine. So that's 5. You can't get them out of this weapon. And that was the problem. And that's the problem they had with their whole premise. And that's why they said, well, they started looking at the single bullet theory. And they says, well, maybe 1 shot went through JFK's neck, and that's the same one that went into Connolly. So that maybe, that's a single shot. And then, but they never talked about the back wound, and that was kept pretty quiet for a long time. There was a guy who worked in the honor guard for JFK. His name is Richard Lipsey, and he gave an interview in like the 70s. And he actually was told, when they moved the body from Parkland over to Bethesda, he was told, you have to stay with the body the whole weekend. You got to go and sit in the autopsy and everything. Those were his orders. So he had to do that. And he explains in this interview, very detailed, how they spent hours trying to find this back wound. And they were actually probing it, and it was hitting the lung, but they could never find the bullet. So that's interesting. Now, I know he had other tapes where he said he felt that the Oswald conclusion was it, but here he explains it in so much detail. He totally tells you that's a separate wound, and he was sitting right there. So that's another guy. We just don't have a really good document, other than what James Jenkins put out and some of the other stuff, that really explains this real well. So I think this was a great interview to have on record. So it kind of supports this. And now I think recently Secret Serviceman Paul Landis came out and said he found a bullet he put on the stretcher. And I always used to see this tape from a nurse, Phyllis Hall. She was who received Kennedy on the emergency room at Parkland. And when the stretcher was rolled in, she said there was a bullet there that she had never seen as any part. You can go see it. It's on YouTube. It's a good interview. And she explained, Connolly coming in, and then JFK came in, and when she saw the bullet, it was laying right on the stretcher. So that kind of ties out with what Paul Landis said. And that's definitely another shot. So when you add all these shots up, I came up with 5 as an absolute minimum. Now, if Conley got hit by a second shot, because he had a lot of wounds, that would just add to it. But the whole premise of 3 shots within the 6-second window is not accurate. I don't think.
No.
Yeah, it's impossible. Yeah, with that weapon, it's impossible.
Exactly. And the lengths they went through, the Warren Commission, even the government, to nail this on Oswald and Oswald only.
Right.
Incredible.
Right. I mean, Lyndon Johnson he formed the Warren Commission, right after the assassination. I want you to, I don't know what he said, but his chief of staff, Hassenbach, clearly wrote a memo.
Right.
He said, when you guys go through your study, we want to be sure that the world and everybody everybody around believes that it's Oswald and that he has no Confederates out there.
Mm-hmm.
And, I know they may have did that for the best security. I mean, for the national security. And maybe if you or I were in the room, maybe we would say, yeah, that's a good idea. But then after so many years, I think, that they should come out with the facts.
Exactly. Speaking of Oswald, what an enigmatic figure he was. And now, I think we now know, how are you convinced, are you, that he was not this misfit?
I read a lot about Oswald, and an unbelievable character in this story. I mean, and it just, some of the stuff that's going on with Oswald just doesn't make sense. I don't know if he was working for the CIA. I believe he worked for the FBI. But his wife was pregnant with their second child, and he went down to New Orleans for like about a couple months or so or whatever. And then he tried to go to Mexico City. I mean, there's just a lot of mystery around him. And the whole Barry Ernest's book, who is a friend of yours. That is an excellent story. I always recommend everybody should read it. First of all, it's a really good book to read. I mean, it's just very interesting the way he goes through the whole story of finding this key witness. But that witness, if the Warren Commission would have let her participate in the time trials and really took her testimony seriously, I think they would realize that Oswald couldn't be on the 6th floor. I mean, there's just no way.
Who this witness is?
Sure. Yeah. And the alleged sniper's nest is on the 6th floor in the corner of the building. And the Warren Commission said that that's where the shots had come from.
Right.
From that corner of the building. Now, Victoria Adams and Sandra Stiles were located on the 4th floor, which is 2 floors below that. And they watched the whole motorcade come by and everything. And immediately after the assassination, her and Sandra, they wanted to go over behind a picket fence. All the crowd was moving up over by the triple underpass behind a picket fence. So she said, let's go there. Well, the elevators were down, so they ran on the stairway. And they went down the stairs. Now, at the same time, there was a police officer in the motorcade, Marion Baker. When he heard the first shot, he thought it came from the Texas School Book Depository. So he raced up, dropped his motorcycle, ran up the stairs, and he said, I think shots came from here. And the manager of the building happened to be standing there, Roy Truly. He says, well, let's go in there. I'll take it. He thought he wanted to get up to the roof. Well, they went over the elevator. Both elevators were down. So they started running up the stairs, and Marion was in front, Marion Baker, and he saw somebody in the 2nd floor lunchroom. He ran in there, and there's Oswald standing there in front of the Coke machine. Now, they went later on, they realized that, how did he get from the 6th floor to the 2nd floor? And they said, let's run some time trials, because they did find a rifle up on the 6th floor tucked behind some boxes. So now, how long did it take? So they ran some time trials. But now remember, at the same time, you've got Victoria Adams and Sandra Stiles going down the stairs, and they never included them in the time trials. I mean, it would have been so easy to do that. And I heard an interview of Victoria Adams. I think it was done by Mark Lane.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and she said that
I didn't know that.
They didn't really get into any of the facts I would really like to hear her talk about it some more. But she said that she kind of alluded that she went to the stairs right away,
That's
And if she would have heard the way those stairs were, that's another thing I found out. It wasn't like, if you're in a hotel and you go down the stairs in a hotel, you're in like a vestibule, it's all closed off. Each time you went down a flight of stairs, you had to go onto that floor. So if he's coming from the sixth floor, the fifth floor, you'd have
I
to
didn't
come
realize.
onto the floor. And now remember, there's three guys on that floor that are just in shock at the window that would have likely seen him,
I never
because
saw
that's
anybody.
one. And then it goes down to the fourth floor.
Okay,
And
I didn't
now
know.
if
That's interesting.
Sandra Stiles and Victoria Adams were in front of Oswald coming down, there was another lady that was by her desk there. She would have saw them. This is all buried in that book, The Girl on the Stairs. It's really interesting. But I found that out about the building, and that was really said, it really made me think there was no way somebody could sneak down those stairs without being noticed.
Exactly.
So, that whole story kind of goes to the supporting the defendant, or Oswald in this case, that, he couldn't have been the one to fire the shots.
No.
Also, there was a guy that had his lunch on the sixth floor, and he ate his lunch between 12 and 12:15. His name was Bonnie Ray Williams, I believe. And he did not hear anybody up there. And one of the things that I think a lot of people don't realize is that floor is one big space. It's not like a bunch of cubicles. So picture him up there eating his lunch at 12 o'clock, the motorcade is scheduled to come by 12:15, and he would have to be up there assembling his rifle or getting set up. And Bonnie Ray Williams is right next to him eating his lunch. I mean, it's just, and even in his testimony, Bonnie Ray says, I could hear my friends on the fifth floor making noise and talking. So I hurried up, ate my lunch, and I went down to sit with them. So he was up there by himself. There was no way Oswald was there. I just can't believe that.
Yes. It's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
And yes, it didn't, speaking of Victoria Adams, the Warren Commission treated these witnesses with intimidation, and didn't they try to change her testimony?
Exactly. Yeah. That actually got her frightened. I think if you read that story, she just
I've read some of it.
She kind of, and a lot of the witnesses started to get intimidated and kind of said, you know what, this is scary. And she actually moved out of Dallas area at one point. So that was part of the story. He was looking all over for her, and he finally found her. I forgot where she was living then, but yeah. And you see this throughout. I mean, anytime they get into a fact that kind of supports more of the conspiracy side, they stop the questioning and they go to something else. I see it throughout all the evidence. And, that's part of the problem is the main defendant. They only had one defendant, who was Oswald. He dies within 48 hours. And now there's really no case. I do a lot of some expert witness work, not a lot, but once in a while I get involved in it. And we have a back and forth. Like if I'm working for the plaintiff, I'll write a report, and the counsel on my side will submit that report, and the guys on the other side will look at it and say, Rante's got this wrong, or he's got this wrong, and they'll send it back. And that's very healthy. I mean, it's part of discovery. It goes back and forth. And, we usually can, between with that process, we kind of all agree on what happened. Well, you didn't have any of that with the Warren Commission, because they didn't really pursue those things. I mean, it's very upsetting. They had a witness, Rose Cherami, that
Oh, yes.
she said that she was that she was with some guys that said they were going to Dallas to assassinate the president. And this was prior. I put it in the category of prior knowledge, and I don't think the Warren Commission ever went and chased her down. It wasn't until the guys in New Orleans opened up the case where they tried to find her, and she had passed away. So,
yeah,
I mean, that kind of stuff just really frustrating. I mean, they could have really got to the bottom of it. I mean, between that and then the autopsy stuff. I mean, if they really would have seriously looked at the autopsy, all the Parkland doctors said that there was a large exit wound in the back of the head. And, when it got to the autopsy photos, they show pictures after the body's, all done, and it's, there's no wound back there. So it's just that kind of frustrating stuff.
Before, like it was like surgery was performed before the autopsy or got to
That's
the test?
that's that's what that is really mysterious. In that Richard Lipsy interview, he says that they definitely had a separate casket for JFK because they were worried about the paparazzi or something. They didn't want to have a lot of press. So he's yeah, we did that as a detour. But the problem is when the body got to the autopsy table, it was in a different casket and it was in a crash bag and everything. It wasn't
Right.
as it left the hospital at Parkland. And then it appeared that there was some surgery to the head area. And if you read Jenkins' book, you can see he kind of thinks that it may have been a different brain. I mean, it was kind of technical. I mean, it
They
was
lost the
a lot
brain.
of information. Yeah, they lost it or whatever. Yeah. So
Oh my goodness. Well, this has been fascinating. I have one
sure,
more question.
sure.
You know, we mentioned about the witnesses. I know the FBI did their investigation before, if I'm correct. And you mentioned something about the grassy knoll. There's so much that went on that day. Unbelievable.
Yeah, yeah.
So there were a lot of the witnesses thought that they heard shots from,
Right.
and most of them were not called to testify.
Right.
There were other people there. Do you think, um, and I know there are people that confessed. What's your take on that?
Well, there was two instances that I think you really got to look at. And one involves a police officer. Immediately after the assassination, there was a police officer directing traffic at Elm in Houston. He ran down the street. He thought the shots came from the grassy knoll, ran up the grassy knoll, and a guy jumps in front of him, says, pulls out a Secret Service badge and says, I got this area secure. So there was no Secret Servicemen stationed
Right.
on that area. And here this guy is stepping in front of a police officer and stopping him from getting back there. So my impression of that is that this guy was part of that shooting team that shot from there. And there he may have been the shooter because there's other testimony that says the rifle was disassembled by a guy in a railroad
Yes.
outfit. So if you kind of look at all that testimony, it seems like another person was taking the weapon away from the scene. And that would make sense because if they planned the assassination, they probably thought there was going to be a lot of people there. I mean, there was very crowded all the way up until that point in
Oh,
the motorcade.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So they figured, we can let the shooter go in one direction, but we got to get the weapon out of the scene. I mean, that would make sense to me. So that's what this guy did. And there was another guy, Malcolm Summers,
Mhm.
and his testimony was very consistent. He didn't make any changes over the years. He ran across the street. You can see him in the Zapruder film, like right near the end. He's the first guy hitting the
There are
ground.
three guys or something.
Well, he went up there and a guy had a raincoat over his
Oh,
arm and he could see the barrel of a gun underneath it. And the guy told him, don't come up here, you get shot. So he just turned around, walked away, but he was trying to get back there too, from a little bit farther south. But his story, I mean, you could see his interviews. They're really interesting. I mean, he talks about this whole thing. He tried to sketch out the person that he saw over the years, but his testimony was very consistent. So
well, we're almost out of time, believe it or
sure.
not. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate this. And this is a subject that we'll be
Oh
talking
yeah,
about for
we
years and
could go
years.
40 hours. I know. Yeah.
Exactly. Once again, Anthony, how do people get in touch with you? And tell us the name of your book again. And
The name of the book is The JFK Assassination, a technical review of the evidence. You can find it on Amazon.
okay.
And I do have a contact email in the back section if you want to write me any notes. Rante Publishing, Arante Publishing, all one word, at gmail.com.
Mm-hmm.
So, my objective with the book was to first kind of tell the story in kind of a timeline, a step-by-step procedure, and then get into all of the technical analysis because I felt, a lot of the books that I was reading were about one aspect of the case, and I kind of wanted to cover the whole, more of like a true
Yeah.
crime type analysis. So those were my two objectives when I put it together. So if you're new to the assassination and you don't know a lot about it, you can read my book and you can see, there's so many subplots going on. And if you want to get into, subplots, I got references. There's just a lot of excellent researchers, the guys who kind of blazed the trail years ago, right after the
Oh,
assassination.
yes.
Their books are excellent. I think Barry's got an excellent book, The Girl on the Stairs. It's just very interesting how he goes through that whole aspect of the story. And there's a lot. There's just a ton of books out there. So
You wouldn't have time in a lifetime to read them all. You know?
right, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's been a pleasure.
Sure.
Anthony, thank you so much. And hope we'll talk soon again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Randy. Thanks for having me.
Sure.
Bye-bye.